All right, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I want to welcome you all to our discussion this evening. I am so pleased to tell you all that this evening I'm going to be talking with Blase Bonpane, who is from California. He is from Los Angeles, and what a history he has. And I'm going to go over some of that with you. He is presently the Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Office of the Americas. And also, he's the Senior Research Fellow of the Council of Hemispheric Affairs in Washington, D.C. He has been the Professor of Political Science, Sociology, Philosophy, and Humanities at Los Angeles Harbor College, and it goes on and on. Importantly, he has also been a priest with the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers. His education, he is a PhD in Social Sciences in Latin America and Liberation Theology from the University of California, Irvine.
Nice to talk to you, Heather.
Oh, it's just such a treat to have you on the show. I want to thank you so much for your great work. I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you this evening. And it's going to be hard to know where to start with this, but one of the things that you did recently was to send me this article about church history and about the Council of Nicaea. And so we want to have a discussion about that, Blase, and get into some of the church history. Now, I need to tell my listeners out there that one of the things that Blase talks about is a critique of fundamentalist religion and what he refers to as far as Christianity is concerned, Christendom. So, and Blase says, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, I know, Blase, but you say in this article that you sent to me that a lot of this started with the Council of Nicaea, thanks to the leaders of the Roman Empire. And I know, again, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but welcome to WRFG in Atlanta. I need to say that first. So, and you also have a radio program, I didn't mention that, at KPFK in Los Angeles. Is that correct?
Yes, that's World Focus every Sunday at 10 a.m. LA time, and it's heard internationally on kpfk.org and in various other stations that pick it up on audio port.
I'm sure that's true. Now, tell us about this article that you wrote, and I'll give the title of the article. It is The Nicene History, Christendom, and War, a reference, you say, and critique. So why did you want to write this article in the first place? It's an article and or a short book, I guess I should say that. It's long. So.
Well, the early Christians started off as a movement, and there was a law in the Roman Empire, non licet esse Christianos. It's not legal to be a Christian, and that, of course, had a death penalty associated with it. One of the reasons for the law was that the Christians would not serve in the Roman military. They felt that you cannot serve the carpenter from Nazareth and also serve empire. They felt it was contradictory. So they were in a constant opposition to militarism, and many of them lost their lives for that, and also because they didn't care to say that the emperor was a deity. That was also, so many of them lived a clandestine life, illegal, clandestine life, some of them in the catacombs, and they were very, very powerful, actually, and they influenced the emperor, Constantine, who allegedly saw a vision about them being the future, and then in 325 A.D., he called a council, paid the way of the various bishops to what is now Turkey, Nicaea, and had a council there to define the only religion that would be accepted by the empire. The empire was one Roman Empire. He said, we want one church, and we're going to have one creed. And we're going to announce that as the only creed. And he put the key role, that's Greek, the two symbols in Greek, on the Roman shield. The Romans always loved Greek. And they put it on the Roman shield, And the muscular Christianity began with that council. And this turned into a loyalty oath for people who could not accept it. And people would say, no, I don't believe there's such a thing as a Trinity. No, I don't believe in the virgin birth. No, I don't believe that Jesus was God, like the emperor is God. I cannot accept that. They lost their lives for that. And then the political influence of Christendom, which is the period where the church was the power in what would be called the present-day Europe, that the Pope had enormous power to call for crusades. These are military actions against Jews and Islam. After the 7th century and the beginning of Islam, we determined that these people have the wrong faith. And the error here, I believe, is to claim we know so much about God. I think it's very, very irreverent to claim we know much about God, and people like St. Thomas Aquinas felt the same way. He said we can't comprehend God. We would have to be God to comprehend God. We could worship God. We could be reverent. But when we start manipulating God, God will do this, won't do that, etc., we are playing God. And it's extremely irreverent. And we hear that frequently on television. They're going to tell you why the Twin Towers came down because of homosexuality. They'll tell you anything they want to make up at the time. This was very serious in the split between the Roman and the Greek church. Because here's St. Augustine. I'm sure he was a great guy, but I think he went too far. He said the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. And that was called the filioque, which is the Father and the Son, saying that in Latin. And the Greeks at that time, even in the time of Augustine, didn't like that. They wanted to say, no, the Holy Spirit proceeds only from the Father. And, of course, neither one knew what they were talking about, but by 1054, this was used as an excuse to break the churches because of a political issue. Would Constantinople be the center of the church, or would Rome be the center? That was behind the dogmatics. And so often, dogmatics had a political issue. And with all religionists, through time, we have seen them saying the right thing. The ancients, long before Jesus, whether it's Buddha or those who preceded him. But when the political manipulation of religion comes in, then you get the concept of just war, then you get the concept of God is on our side, then you get the concept of let's kill the infidels, that they don't have a right to live, and then you have what we see today in ISIS, very similar, saying, "Oh, wait a minute, you're infidels." Well,
Blase, let me just ask you. Let me just ask you a quick question about this. I just want to go back to the Nicene Council. It was when Constantine brought all these scholars and whoever together at this council. They selected the books that ultimately are in the Bible that's used today. Is that correct?
Yes, they were. The New Testament was completed as Ta Biblia, the Bible, by about 394. Many of the books were around, and some of them were accepted, and some of them were not accepted into the canon. We also have a Palestinian canon, and we have a African canon for the Old Law or the Jewish Bible, depending on whether we're looking at Hebrew or Greek. But the New Testament was as a book, as we have it today, by about 394. And then, again, the power in the church said, well, this is without error. This is inerrancy. And again, I believe that's a terrible thing to do.
Explain what inerrancy is. What is that?
Inerrancy means that the Bible is correct in everything.
I see.
That it's without error.
I see.
And we have literally great biblical scholars today and in previous years as well that simply cannot accept that. I mean, you take the various books, things there are things in the old law that could only be the voice of the village elder. You know, and that voice is referred to as the voice of God. And the village elder wants someone killed because they're from another tribe.
Well,
I don't hear the voice of God in that. I don't think any scholar does either. And it's time for us to stop the literalism and to look at the beauty of the figurativism. I love biblical literature, and there's no way I can look upon it as being without error or without flaw. Some of the books are still argued about whether they're legitimate or not. You see the various books, Proverbs and others, telling you the rod and spoil the child. Well, that's a great advice for raising a good soldier. And I don't think we need any good soldiers. I think we need people who can think for themselves. And there's so much of the advice, if you look at the old law, is simply not something you'd want to carry out for anyone.
Blase, on that wise note, I'm going to take a quick break and be back in just a moment, okay? Stay tuned. Again, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace. And this evening, I'm pleased to tell you I'm talking with Blase Bonpane, who is from California, a scholar, an activist, just been involved in so many different things and reflecting right now, as I know he has done over the years, on the impact of fundamentalist Christianity and other fundamentalist religions as well. Now, we were talking about the Council of Nicene, which I know was just so critical for the beginning of the combination, Blase, of religion and state. And it's remained that way ever since, has it not?
Well, it very definitely. The Vatican took on the names from the Roman Empire, words like curia that we see in the Vatican structure. And the Vatican structure is very similar to the Roman imperial structure. And that's where the concept of infallibility also came down. And I'm very grateful for the new Pope Francis, who has spoken out strongly against fundamentalism, against literalism. And now one of the greatest theologians in the church, Hans Kung, who has been roundly punished by previous popes and told he couldn't teach in a Catholic university. Well, he writes a letter to Pope Francis just a week ago, and he said, Pope Francis, I'd like to come to the Vatican and discuss with you this concept of infallibility. Well, Pope Francis wrote back and said, wonderful, come ahead. And it's about time that's dealt with, because it just flies in the face of history.
So let's talk about what infallibility is. Define that.
It means that in matters of faith and morals, the church cannot err. We cannot make a mistake. In matters of faith and morals, we've seen so many things over the years that have changed. In terms of faith, people used to talk about limbo. That's a place where unbaptized children went, and so many parents were so sad to hear that your child cannot be part of the beatific vision, but your child will be naturally happy. Well, this stuff is all made up in somebody's office, and finally the church put it aside and said, well, limbo, forget about it. Well, there were special places in Catholic cemeteries for unbaptized babies, and this was a heretical concept also.
Now, let me just ask you this, Blase. This is just a way to keep people in line, right? Make sure that they follow the directives both of the church and of the state. Is that correct?
Well,
largely?
Of course, the two were totally united, and that was a big part of the problem. The problem, I believe, is that an institution was formed. You might say a corporation was formed. I look upon the work of Jesus as beginning a movement, you might say analogous to something like Dr. King's movement, the movement for justice and peace, that Dr. King never told people, you've got to become a Baptist because I'm a Baptist. I never heard him once proselytize for his church. He's part of a movement, peace on earth, goodwill to everyone. And then we break it into sectarianism, and we start killing one another. The Catholics and Protestants killed each other for decades, for centuries, actually. And we killed Islam, we killed the Jews, we marched into Jerusalem and showed no mercy on women, children.
During the Crusade, you're talking about the Crusades, right?
Yeah, those are the Crusades.
Right.
And part of that was followed by naval battles, like the Battle of Lepanto, which the Pope Pius V was in charge of the whole world at that time, the European world, and he took on the Islamic Navy and won. And since then, they've celebrated the feast as the Feast of the Holy Rosary.
Now, I want to ask you a question. In your excellent article, you make reference to the fact that the Church will criticize and or punish and or alienate those who, like, say, have women who have a child out of wedlock, or children who are not christened, as you said, or men who masturbate, or whatever. So they will criticize the individuals, but not the institutions, is what you said.
Yes, the institution should deal with its sins. They had this just war theory, which was put together again by St. Augustine and also was increased by St. Thomas Aquinas later. But just again, some beautiful things are happening even within the Church. Within a month of April this year, 2016, there's a great meeting at the Vatican by all of the various interests, theologians from all over the world, of Pax Christi, a huge Catholic peace organization, and they literally bombed the just war theory, saying, look, this was so often used as an excuse for imperial wars, and if you didn't say it was a just war, you might just lose your life. You decide that a war called by the Church or by the Roman Empire was not just, you're in trouble. So it was used badly, and they added that today you can't mess with just war because we're just 3 minutes from abolishing the planet with our nuclear insanity, and we've just put up $1 trillion to modernize nuclear weapons, which can only be done by the criminally insane. And this is what we're doing instead of dealing with the homeless, instead of dealing with schools that are falling apart, instead of dealing with students being put into debtor's prison because they want to go to college. We're building modern nuclear weapons to kill ourselves with. So it's time for us to wake up, and this was the message of Buddha 500 years before Jesus. He said, you have to become awake. He felt that people live and die and are never awake in their whole life. And the purpose of his teaching was that we be awake. We say, wait a minute, what is a nuclear weapon? It can destroy life on the planet. Yeah, well, get rid of it. Stop playing games and stop putting $1 trillion into making it better. Party is over. We have candidates that are talking as if 4% of the world's people, that is, people who live in the United States, 96% of the world doesn't live here. And we're going to control the rest of the 96%. We're not going to control them. We have not controlled them. We've fought wars ever since 1945. We've won every battle and lost every war. And we're losing the war now. The people in Iraq are in a state of mutiny as we send more troops over there.
And drones.
Vietnam repeated again.
Right.
There is no thinking. There is nothing but a knee-jerk reaction, repeating the past, and to repeat the past is a very offensive thing to do. We should learn from the past, not repeat it.
Along that line, let's talk a little bit about where do we go from here? I mean, this has been, we've had centuries of this history of the combining of religion and state. It'll take a while, I guess, for us to get rid of that, and I appreciate you saying that there is a movement toward that end, particularly what's been happening with the Catholic Church as we speak, when just last week they had a meeting where they vilified the just war concept. Excellent. Yeah. But right, and one of the things you say in your article also, Blase, is that one of the largest so-called, if you want to call it, religious group are those who are no longer Catholics, I guess because they got tired of being preached to like this. So I'd like to hear your reason as to why they left the church. But you are also wanting to appeal to them to be, I think, more compassionate, or to look more closely at what the combination of the state and religion has been doing. And before we even go on with that, I want to mention one other thing, and it's that it intrigues me that so many of these political candidates keep invoking God, and I'm thinking, so what God are they talking about? I'd like to know. This warring God, I guess. I don't know. But
it's the marriage between church and state, and in our day is called U.S. exceptionalism, which is a religion and a religiosity of patriotism. We have been responsible for killing approximately 30 million people since 1945.
Wow.
And that's supposed to be okay. Well, yes, my article was written for people who are lapsed Catholics, which represent the second largest church in the United States, so that they might see beyond the sectarianism, the legalism.
So why did they leave? Why did they leave? Why did they leave the church?
I think something that triggered it certainly was the sexual scandal. That was a big part of it. People were really disgusted to hear that this abuse was going on, and nothing was being done about it.
Right.
And those that knew canon law would see that those of us in the clergy who got married were accused of attempting marriage and were automatically excommunicated. Those who, on the contrary, were sexual predators were sent to the next parish. Well, I think many Catholics said, enough. You know, we're just not going to take that kind of authoritarianism anymore, and you better just wake up again to what's going on, and we're going to review what are the essential issues in belief. And we belong to a movement which tells us to love one another and to practice compassion. And now the new Pope Francis again has called for a year of mercy, and I think that's very important and very necessary. But there are still elements within the institution that are just not acceptable. The relationship to women, people like Father Roy Bourgeois being thrown out because he supports the ordination of women. I mean, were they thrown out of the church because they were pedophiles? I don't think they were. They were moved, most of them. And so people became aware of the contradictions that were going on here and felt they simply were not comfortable within the institution. And I would see, with the advent of what is called liberation theology, which we saw so clearly in Latin America, the sectarian issues came down, way down. We weren't talking about people joining a church. We were talking about people serving one another, which is the message that is from the judgment account the word picture that Jesus gave in Matthew 25. So our service of God is as close as our service to our neighbor. And to complicate the issue by saying you miss Mass on Sunday, that's a mortal sin, or I don't think your first marriage was valid, or et cetera, et cetera. They're going too far and doing too much, and intruding too much into the lives of the people. The issue isn't whether or not you went to Mass on Sunday. The issue is whether you have any compassion in your heart. And I've seen bishops who understood that. There are very, very few, but I've seen them in Latin America, bishops like Bishop Romero, and in our own country, bishops like Bishop Roswell. He had a huge crowd of people, an ecumenical gathering. There were atheists, Jews, Protestants, and he was there celebrating Mass. And what he said was, with anyone with love in their heart, please come up and receive Holy Communion. Well, that's slightly different. Well, he was breaking with tradition, and he knew it. And he did it knowingly, saying that this other stuff is just too legalistic, it's too sure of itself, and it's too imperial. So we believe that today our young people could say, I cannot serve empire and serve the Jesus of the New Testament. And people like the Quakers have been doing that for years. So it's really strange that some would say, well, you want to be a conscientious objector, join the Quaker Church. Well, it's tragic that you wouldn't say that about the Catholic Church. I know our chaplain in the Marine Corps was proud of the fact. He said, well, 50% of the Marines are Catholic. That was the biggest thing he could say, that we were the largest group of any religion in the Marine Corps. Well, maybe the answer is, so what?
And you were in the Marine Corps as well, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in the reserve.
Right.
I was not a combat veteran.
Forgive me just a second. I just want to tell our listeners that you are listening to WRFG-Atlanta 89.3 FM. The program is Just Peace. My name is Heather Gray, and I'm talking with Blase Bonpane. We're talking about religion this evening and about fundamentalist religion and a lot of the harm it's created. Now, one of the things you also say in your article and or short book, Blase, is about it's time for some kind of accountability here and perhaps even some retribution or apology on the part of the church for its excessive violence over the centuries and its condoning of this by the state. Am I right?
I think that's very necessary. I know that Pope John Paul II was reviewing church history, and as much as he could do after he started reviewing it was to cry, because it is not a living history. Together with the Crusades, we had the Inquisition,
right,
based on the theory that error has no rights. And because you are a Jew, you are in error, so you can convert or die. And the same applies to Islam. And we have the truth. And outside of our truth, there is no truth. And they had this theory, of course, outside the church, there is no salvation. Well, this is all entirely too much and should be denounced and should be repented of. Instead of that, I might say that guilt is wholesaled to the people, and forgiveness is retailed by the church. So it is not a very good combination. It's time for the church to look on its own history very actively and to repent of these things. We aren't playing games here. We have a doctrine, and I'm so proud of the newspaper, the National Catholic Reporter.
Mm-hmm.
It has been using good journalism for years, and they've been doing research on this very point. And they published something the other day from the Papal Bull, that is an order from Rome, 1452. The Papal Bull Dum Diversis instructed the crown to invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, put them into perpetual slavery and to take away their possessions and property, followed by the bull 1454, titled Romanus Pontifex, furthers that thinking, sanctifying the seizure of non-Christian lands, that's throughout Africa, and restating the legitimacy of enslaving non-Christian people. Now, as far as journalism goes, I want to thank the National Catholic Reporter for bringing that to light, saying that, look, we have a problem here, and this should be repented of. We shouldn't try to cover this over. And this did impact not only Latin America, but the United States as well. Yeah, so even here we have the Supreme Court Justice John Marshall saying that on the discovery of this immense continent, the great nations of Europe were eager to appropriate to themselves so much of it as they could respectively acquire. So just take the money and run.
This is another sort of issue here, and we probably won't be able to get into this evening. But one of the things I learned from my reading of Karl Marx, he would say that the reason people are treated differently is for profit. Now, we haven't talked. We've made reference to that somewhat, but a lot of this discriminatory behavior on the part of the church that gave allowance to the state and the military to take lands and enslave people was for somebody else's profit. Seems to me.
Absolutely, it came down to that, because even with the Inquisition, the property of the victim of the Inquisition was seized, which had their property. Marx had a great insight, and he had a theory which we should think about every day, which is very simply the ideas of every age are the ideas of the ruling class. Well, why does he say that? Because they have the power to promulgate their thinking. They start and say, well, the poor are lazy. Pretty soon you hear the poor saying the poor are lazy. Mm-hmm. Because from up above, and he kept repeating it. And then, after he did the Communist Manifesto, a very brilliant Pope, Leo XIII, published an encyclical standing on the shoulders of Karl Marx. It was called on labor, and it announced the fact that material goes into the factory and comes out enabled. People go into the factory and come out destroyed. And it took on the idea of unjust profit, what was called the plus value of labor, that here the laborer puts $100 value into a piece of wood in one day and is paid $3. Well, what happens to the rest of it? It goes to the ones who own the equipment. Well, that's been going on now for too long. It's time for those who work to own the equipment, quite simply. And we hear that from people like Bernie Sanders. He has a good message there. We've always had problems with his foreign policy. On the domestic issues, he is right on so many issues, and many of them are things that we've had, like the Great New Deal.
Well, Blase, let me just ask you, talking about all these various issues and talking about the problems historically, I did ask you before, we had a little bit of discussion about that, where do we go from here, as Dr. King would say. But, so you've said that the largest so-called religious, or I guess I should put that in quotes, group in the United States are lapsed Catholics. So, okay, so that's one thing. I'd like your opinion about what could be done with that group, or who's in touch with them, or I guess that's through like the Catholic publications and some of you all who are also concerned about this history of the church. But also, if there was to be some kind of retribution, if there was to be some sort of apology from the church, and I know that the current Pope Francis has made suggestions toward that, inkling toward that, and his policies have been quite remarkable. But what could be done about that? Should there be requests, demands on the part of the people to say, let's take a look at this and decide what's really best for us to do under the circumstances to have some kind of reconciliation of some sort.
What we have to do is realize that the name of one's religion is meaningless.
Okay.
It doesn't make any difference what we call it. I can be a vicious dictator and call myself a Catholic in good standing. It doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell anyone anything about who I am. So that's the first thing people have to understand, that what you call yourself, it is what you do that matters, and that having worked in the peace movement for many years, so many of the people that I've worked with are not able to affirm the existence of God. They're highly spiritual. And to understand that, we might look at people like, well, look at Fidel Castro the other day. He's very aged now, and it was at the last party conference he'll ever be at, I'm sure. But he recalled there and other places as well how he got some of his ideas. And he said that when I was young, I watched the little sisters, those monjitas, the little nuns, taking care of the lepers, taking care of the sick, taking care of those who fell through the cracks. He said, I will never forget it. Era una conducta perfecta comunista. It was a perfect communist conduct. And the conduct is what matters, not the name of your religion or your politics. What is conduct? Are you showing compassion or not? If you believe that compassion can be systematized, I do, into a decent political system that will consider health care as a right, as much of the world does. It will consider education as a right, not something to borrow $100,000 for. These things are part of a civilized situation, and in that area, we are not civilized. In terms of our endless and perpetual wars, we're totally uncivilized. Our reasoning is false. We have no reason for these wars. They were unnecessary. They did not have to be fought. People, I don't think many wonderful people can believe that within less than 1% of our population, there are people who don't care about the death of our young people, who don't care about the death of a so-called enemy, who only realize that they're becoming multimillionaires by killing. And that apparently there is such a group. Eisenhower identified it. It has become the military, industrial, congressional, prison, gun, pharmaceutical lobby, and it is basically running the country. Now, we have here going on two things, one at the same time. One is a circus, a campaign. It's totally a circus. In that circus, there's no war. There's apparently no problems of any kind outside the United States, so they talk about some domestic issues. Then outside in the real world, there is what looks like World War III and the extreme danger of nuclear war right now. Nothing is being said. So you have these two things going on simultaneously, and it helps us understand that we need a movement, and we have a movement. We have a marvelous peace movement and also an environmental movement. And actually, the two have to be married. We cannot separate them. I don't know if there are some environmentalists that don't care to talk about nuclear disaster, which is the greatest possible disaster to the environment, but the two have to merge more, and they are merging more. They're beginning to understand that the military at peace is the greatest threat to the environment. And the military at war and this planet are not compatible at all. We cannot live here with the type of military disaster we have all around us.
Blase, we're going to take just a quick break. I'll be back in just a second. Stay tuned. All right. Again, my name is Heather Gray. The program is Just Peace, and we're talking with Blase Bonpane from California, and he has this tremendous history and reflection on so much of what's been happening with the church. I hated to cut you out there when you were talking about the military, Blase, but it occurred to me as you're talking about all this that, I think what would be good is for the combination of the environmental movement, the peace movement, the religious community, and so forth, to come up with a platform for this year. Sounds like where you're going, right?
They're moving in that direction of understanding. Good. There are far less religious arguments. There are far less doctrinal arguments. There are far less ideological arguments. People are focusing on the importance of living on this planet. As Bradbury said, that we live on a rock going around the sun. We should be holding hands, you know, and if people would think for a moment, they'd realize that the age of nationalism is over. That we are in a boat, and the front part of the boat is sinking, and we're saying no problem.
Yeah,
we're in the same boat. And old-fashioned nationalism doesn't make any sense at all.
Now, I need
solving the environmental problem instead of putting the attention into saving the ocean, which we need. Instead of that, we destroyed much of the Middle East and created a response, a blowback, known as ISIS.
I wanted to thank you so much for this discussion, and I do want to ask you also, if people want additional information, where should they go? What should they do?
Well, they can go to our website, which is simply officeoftheamericas.org.
Right.
All of my books are on. I have 7 books on Amazon under my name, and they can go there. We also have an email of OOA. That's the letter O twice, followed by A. OOA at I as in Island, G as in George, C as in cat.org.
Wonderful.
So, easily accessible, and we'd be happy to hear from them. And all of the books are there, just on Amazon. And my last name is Bonpane, B as in boy, O-N as in Nellie, P as in Peter, A-N-E. And they're all listed there and available.
And Blase's first name is spelled B-L-A-S-E. So he has just a lot of excellent books that all of us should be reading, I think. So I so enjoyed reading your article, Blase. I want to thank you so much for your great work. And I tell you what, I want to get you back on. I want to talk about liberation theology. Okay?
Very good.
That would be wonderful.
Okay,
and I want to tell you, I did call. No, it's my pleasure. I did talk with, or briefly, Father Roy Bourgeois and I were trying to get in touch with each other today, so I know he sends his greetings to you as well. So,
been dear friends for 4 decades.
Yeah, I know. That's wonderful. Take care.
Heather.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.